This is for Cameron. Cam.
What is up, Mountaineer fans? We have an exciting show for you this evening. I have an exciting guest for you this evening. We're going to talk some West Virginia Baylor football. This Thursday, we're going to play under the lights at Mountaineer Field. I've got a guest for you, Craig Smoak from Sikkim 365 Sports. How we doing, Craig?
Doing well, Paul. Appreciate you having me on, and yeah, it's good to have game week after both teams got a little bit of a break, so should be interesting coming up on Thursday. And like I said, I appreciate you having me.
Hey, no problem. I appreciate you being on. So, I got to tell you, neither team looks good coming into this loss to Oklahoma State. You guys are probably one of the best two-loss teams in the country. I don't think there's many people that would disagree with that. West Virginia, one of the most inconsistent teams in the country. And yet, when you boil it all down to something, Baylor's never won in Morgantown. Can you make any sense of this?
Yeah, I think the Morgantown thing has been somewhat a product of just the fact they haven't played there a ton. That this is still, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, relatively new, even though now it's kind of been a while. But you know what I mean? There's not like that 100 years of
Right.
results and whatnot. I think that's part of it. I think too, just when they've gone up there, either West Virginia's had a good team, or they've been pretty evenly matched, or maybe Baylor hasn't been the favorite. But they there's been a couple times where you thought they might go up there and get themselves a win. So it's sort of surprising that this is one of the last boxes they haven't been able to check off. And if they don't check it off this week, I know West Virginia fans feel the same way about how important it is to get a win for them this week. But I think it's equally important for Baylor. I don't think that they can really afford to have this streak continue. So I'm very curious, to see how all this breaks down ultimately. But yeah, I just think that like I said, there's been even matchups, times where WV's better, and then the times when Baylor's been better. I think just the crowd's gotten to them. I think the atmosphere, the travel's gotten to them, and that's all credit to West Virginia and their fans and that atmosphere. So I know I've had a couple West Virginia fans telling me that they don't think it's going to be that same type of atmosphere because it's not as, I guess, amongst the fan base as positive right now as maybe it's been in other years past. But I still expect there to be a great atmosphere and a great crowd. And I think West Virginia fans are smart enough to realize that Baylor's definitely beatable. So I anticipate them, having an impact on Thursday night. So Baylor's going to have to overcome that. But yeah, I think it's just a combination of things. And, a lot of that's a credit to the Mountaineers.
Yeah, it's looking to be a deficiency on deficiency, strength on strength matchup. The lines of scrimmage on both sides are strengths for either team. The Baylor defensive line, one of the best in all of college football. West Virginia, a much improved offensive line, even though Texas absolutely wore us out last or the week before last. But I think you guys are a different type of defensive line than Texas is. Not quite the huge front that they are. You guys are more of an athletic front. You've got a couple big dudes there, but you lost some really good players as well. But what I'm really interested in is to see you've got obviously two great weapons in Sims and Baldwin out there with shaping throwing those guys the ball. And I'm curious to see how in the last 2 weeks our defensive backfield has hopefully recovered, hopefully gotten a little bit more experience. They scrimmaged 3 times over the last 2 weeks, hard hitting football. We've got a guy that's been injured that came in as a JUCO that's supposed to be playing his first game with us. How do you see that matchup playing out?
As far as Baylor wide receivers and tight ends go, I think that's a big question mark for the Bears. Quite frankly, Paul, there's a lot of question marks for this team, and probably more than even if you were being a pessimist, you really expected there to be at this point. But going into this season, one of the things that you were curious about was the skill spots because you lost Tyquan Thornton, who ended up being the top 50 overall pick to the Patriots. You lost, some other, great weapons as far as the running backs go with Abram Smith, and then Treston Ebner was a guy who could be a running back, but also was a great passing threat for you as well. There was others. R.J. Sneed transferred out to Colorado, even though he didn't have as much of an impact last year as I thought he might. Drew Estrada ended up going off to the NFL, and he's on the Texans practice squad now. So, they had a lot to replace. And I remember during the offseason, a lot of people talking about, well, they got young guys, but they got talent. They'll be fine. They got talent. And I was more of like, yeah, they got talent, but like it's totally unproven. There's no,
Yeah.
Tyquan Thornton wasn't great as a freshman. He was pretty good. He was fine, but he was way better as a senior. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they got talent, but they've got freshman talent. They've got sophomore talent. They've got unproven talent. And I think that's reared its head. Ben Sims has been good. He's also been banged up. So he hasn't been 100% healthy, throughout the whole season just yet. But I do expect him to play and be good and all that. And I think he'll be a threat. I think that, outside of that, it's your guess is as good as mine as far as who's going to step up to the plate and actually make a difference for them, because they don't have a Treston Ebner coming out of the backfield. They got a couple guys at running back who can catch the ball on occasion, but nothing like what they had with him. And the receiver room, quite frankly, is just totally unproven. It's a work in progress. And I think that if you were to say, like, who could have the advantage here potentially, I'd have to give it to West Virginia, just because even if they have questions, I don't feel like they have as many questions on defense or in their secondary as Baylor has, just in terms of, okay, we're 6 games in now and we still don't have a number one at wide receiver. Ben Sims is your number one, but he's your tight end, and that's fine. Like we see with Georgia or, Kyle Pitts in Florida, or Iowa State with Kohler and whoever. Like, I mean, we've seen teams that can live with the number one at tight end, and they've been able to kind of do that. But, man, it's more just they don't have a lot around that, It's just a lot of just unproven. And, yes, there is some talent, but it's unproven talent again. So I kind of keep hammering that, but I'm hammering that because that's been a conversation after every single game this year. It's like, okay,
Right.
Who's going to step up? Who's going to step up? Who's going to step up? Who's going to step up in Morgantown? Ben Sims seems like a safe bet, but Paul, outside of that, it's anybody's guess. I mean, especially as far as the wide receivers go. So I think that that's an area that West Virginia could certainly feel pretty good about is what their secondary and just defense overall might be able to do to any Baylor receiving threats. But yeah, if you're going to keep an eye on a guy, keep an eye on Ben Sims, and maybe Drake Dabney, their backup tight end, to a lesser extent. He can catch a couple of balls and be kind of dangerous. But man, they honestly they just don't have a lot that's make you go, uh-oh, like, what are we going to do about this guy? They don't have that right now.
Well, I'll tell you a couple guys I do have that feeling with. Galvin Miller, Keith Gall. Those are guys that I feel like are really proven. You guys have one of the best offensive lines in the conference. But it's strength on strength. We have one of the better defensive lines in the conference. So how do you feel like McWilliams and Jones have played behind those guys this year? Have they shown some flashes?
Yeah, it's mostly been Squirrel Williams has really been kind of the highlight guy for them, but he doesn't play a whole lot. He didn't have a bunch of carries in their last game. I say as far as kind of their running back room, McWilliams, he's out of action for the time being. He got dinged up and has a concussion that's been ailing him, so you don't have to worry about Tay McWilliams. Quaylon Jones is more of a third running back type, I think, based on where they are right now. The guys to really worry about would be, number one would be Richard Reese. And I think he's a guy that a lot of people are going to be learning about as the rest of this season goes along. I think if you've played Baylor already, you're probably aware of him. But he's just a true freshman who really, when Tay McWilliams got hurt, he was kind of called into further action. But he's still a true freshman, and he's not a big guy either. He's kind of a smaller body in comparison to most college running backs these days. So you're going to see Richard Reese. You probably see 15 to 20 carries from him. You'll see Craig Williams, aka Squirrel, who is their dynamic guy, but he's very tiny. He's very injury prone, and so that's why they've had to basically, handle him with kid gloves. Because there's such a risk for it's like on the one hand he's so good when he's healthy, and on the other hand he's just so injury prone that they have to walk a really delicate balance with him. So yeah, I think you'll see mostly Reese. You'll see a little bit of sprinkling of Squirrel, and to what extent I'm very curious, because he got very little play when we saw them 2 weeks ago against Oklahoma State, which was surprising because they really could have used him to do a lot more than just a couple of carries that he had. And then you mentioned Jones, and Quaylon Jones is a guy who'll probably get a handful of carries as well in this game, I would think. Yeah, I mean, I think that they've been okay. I think that their ceiling is much higher than what we've seen so far, but injuries and just the situational aspect of, the games they've been in and whatnot have kind of limited this from being the sort of, bell cow type of back group that they would love to have. Their bell cow, the guy they thought would be their bell cow, McWilliams, haven't seen much of him. I mean, I don't know how bad his concussion must be because he's been dealing with it for a while. So they don't really have a bruiser, Paul. They've got some speedsters. I guess Quaylon Jones actually would probably be the closest to a bruiser, but again, he doesn't get a lot of carries. So I think you'll see a lot of Richard Reese, and I think he'll be able to do relatively well. But I am concerned that if, their receiver targets aren't getting any separation or aren't able to make some tough catches, that West Virginia defense could really key in on the run game. And you mentioned that line, and they've been very good over the last year and a half. I think they played well. I think Baylor fans are maybe a little bit spoiled and expected them to be just like completely dominant. And, for Blake Shapen to never feel pressure or anything like that. It's been a little bit more of a work in progress, but Khalil Keith started practicing again this week. He's been a missing piece for them, and so I'm not sure if that means he'll play or not. But if he does, I think that is good news for Baylor. But I like West Virginia's chances, man, just in overall against this offense, because right now the O-line's been pretty good, the running backs have been okay, the receivers have been and that's sort of where this offense is. Whereas I think last year going in, you would have said the offensive line's been great. The running backs, Abram Smith in particular, and Ebner, great. Receivers, pretty good, right? And all of that's changed from last year. So I think West Virginia's really, got not a favorable matchup, but they've got a pretty even matchup in my eyes when you look at line to skill spots on the Baylor offense.